Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Wednesday, January 28th. Now, in light of the upcoming expiration of the New START treaty, as well as the various flashpoints we have that could indeed erupt into nuclear warfare, I'm going to just cover some of the overview of the collapse of the various nuclear weapons treaties that limited the deployment and in terms of numbers as well as types of weapon systems and so on, but that ultimately this kind of dangerous escalation over the last decades that we've seen goes back to LaRouche's warnings that in light of the impending collapse of the City of London and Wall Street, the financial system, that they would pursue global war in order to not pay their debts. Now, on the front of the financial collapse, we have some news out of Japan that I'll come to in a moment, but just to remind you that 1 week from today, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, often just referred to as the New START, will expire. That's the treaty that limited the number of strategic offensive weapons on both sides, that is Russia and the United States. And its collapse comes out, well, it's the last remaining of the arms treaties that we've had with Russia and after the, and the Soviet Union before that. It comes on the back of the collapse of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the ABM Treaty, as well as the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty. Recall, just to give an arc of this, recall that George Bush Jr. pulled out of the ABM Treaty, or announced that he was pulling out of the ABM Treaty within a few weeks of September 11th, 2001. So in December, he gave the announcement of that, and by 2002, they had pulled out. Now, what happened then is the Bush administration began to ring Russia with these with the various ABM systems that were claimed that, they're just defensive, even though everybody knew they could be outfitted with offensive weapons, and said they were doing so because of the threat being posed from Iran. Now, Putin, a few years later in 2007, said, well, look, if you're that freaked out about Iran, rather than put missile systems in Poland and other parts of Europe, why don't you work with us to put it in Azerbaijan, which will be essentially in Iran's backyard? Now, of course, that was rejected by the Bush administration because it had nothing to do with Iran. It was always about Russia. So now then we had the collapse of the INF Treaty in Trump's first term. In 2019, he pulled out of the INF Treaty. John Bolton, our favorite neocon, played a prominent role in getting Trump to move in that direction, or at least was one of the voices. Whether Trump knew anything about what he was doing or not is unclear. But anyway, Trump claimed, well, we're just going to negotiate a better deal, as all these treaties collapse, we'll just negotiate a better deal, and we'll bring in China, although China has made the point consistently that there's allegedly have about 600 nuclear weapons versus the many thousands, 5,000 plus, close to 6,000 deployed by the United States and Russia, and therefore, given the, outweigh the weighted difference in that the U.S. and Russia should work theirs out before they bring them in. Anyway, that's what Trump has said. We'll just get a better deal. But so far, we haven't really seen Trump do any of this. And we have, again, 1 week for him to accept the Russian offer that they basically, that they will continue to abide by the arrangements of the New START treaty as long as the United States does, they will as well. And in the meantime, we can work out a new agreement. So that's what the Russians have offered. That offer, assumedly, is on the table for the next week. So we'll see what Trump does. Now, I think, just to be clear, that what Russia did in light of the collapse of these various treaties is they pursued an alternative course. And that was to develop new systems based on new physical principles, as they said. Now, that's very coherent with the language that Lyndon LaRouche developed during the Strategic Defense Initiative, or his version of the Strategic Defense Initiative, I should say, where LaRouche premised the SDI, his version of the SDI, on the idea that we would develop entirely new systems based on new physical principles. And he outlined the SDI as being laser defense systems that would not only be involved in the military dimension, but as well that it would be part of the full spectrum approach to the advancing of the physical economy, namely the fusion or the aspects of laser technology would be part of the development of a new fusion platform for the United States, but to be worked in collaboration with the then Soviet Union, and have the spillover technologies drive the overall economy. That was LaRouche's idea of the SDI. That was fundamentally different than the off-the-shelf versions that became known as Star Wars or the High Frontiers, the just using, again, off-the-shelf technologies of missiles shooting down other missiles. So we didn't go in that direction. Neither did the Soviet Union accept LaRouche's offer, and instead pursued the Cold War dynamic. And due to the attrition and the inherent inflationary, result of just dumping more and more money into the arms race, that ultimately led to their collapse, as Lyndon LaRouche had forecast about 6 years before that, maybe 5 years, I forget the exact details. But that's what Russia has done since the collapse of the ABM treaty and the INF. They've pursued another approach. And we've already seen what some of the results of that are, namely the Oreshnik that we've seen on the battlefields of the proxy war in Ukraine. That is, as Sergei Narishkin, the head of the SVR, let me just state what the Oreshnik is. This is a hypersonic missile that has various deployment of warheads that have hit the battlefields of Ukraine twice so far. So far, they've just been kinetic, conventional warheads, but they could be outfitted with nuclear warheads as well. Now, on the combat use of the Oreshnik system, Sergei Narishkin, the head of the SVR, which is Russia's foreign intelligence, just said that the reaction in both military and political circles of the West was overwhelming. I think we can imagine that they are aware that these systems could very well easily hit Europe, coming in at Mach 10 plus, and again could be outfitted with nuclear warheads, although it appears that they're at a conventional level have been very devastating. The other systems that they've developed is the Burevestnik, which is a nuclear-powered hypersonic missile. That means that with that kind of a fuel source, that is nuclear power as its fuel source, it can effectively remain in the air for any relevant period of time that it would need to, and then drop when it needs to as well. And they've also developed this Poseidon, the underwater drone or torpedo that could devastate our coastal cities, with some descriptions of it saying that it could unleash a radioactive tsunami. So that was Russia's approach, was to pursue the new physical principles. There are probably others that we don't even know about, but obviously they've now developed hypersonic systems that are admitted by the West as incapable of being shot down. So now, these are effectively the systems that Putin pointed out in his 2018 State of the Union address, where he said, look, I want to just tell those who have fueled the arms race over the past 15 years They said they wanted unilateral advantages over Russia's. They introduced unlawful sanctions. And then Putin went on to say, you have failed to contain Russia. And then outlined that after the collapse of the ABM treaty in 2002, he said that Russia made it clear that they would pursue a different approach, that they would take measures to develop their own systems. And he said, in this 2018 speech, no one listened to us then, so listen to us now. So now I think just on the note of the fact that instead of listening, the City of London pursued their hegemonic approach to get nations into line, and that, of course, was behind the proxy war in Ukraine. I think just on that note, it should be, there are reports coming out that the Trump administration is leaning very heavily on Ukraine to accept territorial concessions. The Financial Times, that is what it is citing 8 people familiar with the talks, reports that the U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine will depend on whether Kiev agrees to withdraw troops from the non-occupied part of Donbass. And that Washington may give Kiev additional weaponry, so on and so forth. So obviously we don't know what Zelensky will do. He's in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation politically inside of Ukraine. And of course, he's being coached by the coalition of the willing, or the coalition of the killing, as it's done inside of Ukraine. That is the Western powers that have pursued the never-ending war there. Now, at the same time that there may be positive developments inside of Ukraine, we'll have to see where that goes. We do have this Iran remaining as a flashpoint. Trump is talking about the big, beautiful armada beautifully sailing on its way to Iran. Perhaps a precision strike against those that were responsible for the recent protests. Whatever the various justifications that are being put out, it clearly is a dangerous flashpoint, one that could go nuclear. I will just point out that people like Colonel Larry Wilkerson has said that one of the reasons that Trump has gone along with Netanyahu's approach on attacking Iran is that Netanyahu has threatened to use nuclear missiles if Trump doesn't join in on the fight. So, that obviously we don't know the answer or the truth of that, but it would not surprise me. Now, I think just to be clear that the dangerous escalation that we've seen in terms of the nuclear escalation and the ensuing response by the Russians and the development of their new systems, the question has to be asked why. And again, as I mentioned, LaRouche said that rather than, pay their debts, the City of London would pursue a global war in order to, not have to deal with the fact that their system has collapsed. And we've seen the various collapses over the recent period in the kind of the boom-bust cycle. I will just add, if you haven't read Harley Schlanger's work on that was the role of Jeffrey Epstein, that he wasn't just creating the honeypot, coercion techniques for the political and business class, but that he was indeed one of the coordinators of the boom-bust cycle, the Silicon Valley bubble that we saw at the early 2000s, the recent AI bubble, previous bubbles beyond that, but that he would organize the elite class, or was part of the organizing grouping within the elite class to get them from the bust to the new boom and increase their power in the meantime. But rather than accept that the fact that the system is gone, that the parasite has killed the host, that is the financial class that has, parasitized the physical economy, rather than admit that, if you can't beat them, join them. In other words, join the BRICS, which are pursuing an entirely different approach. We instead have this, commitment to hegemony, whether this is perhaps what's behind some that suggest that Trump's pursuing a Fortress America policy to retrench so that we can rearm and pursue hegemony later, and in the meantime pursue it in our region. Perhaps this is what Greenland is about. Others suggesting that maybe this is related to the Trump's pursuit of the Golden Dome, which, given that it is not very likely in terms of its success, some have suggested this may be actually setting up a first strike dynamic. Anyway, we don't know a lot of these questions of what's going on and the power plays within the establishment. But in terms of recent tremors in the financial system, I just want to cite one of them, which, of course, there's many things that threaten the financial system. The AI bubble could blow out any minute. That would unwind, would be one of the means to unwind and create a kind of a margin call for the quadrillions of dollars of derivatives that are clogging up the system. But anyway, what has just occurred, and we'll see where it goes, is that Japan has increased their bond rates from 1.6% at the beginning of November up to now 2.26%. And this increase would threaten the various hedge funds and financial firms that have, as well as the individual Japanese investors, which would have to take losses unwinding their trades in the yen carry trade. That is where, at higher interest rates, you bring over the more expensive money to make money on the yen carry trade, which the Japanese have had the much lower interest rate. So apparently Takaichi has proposed to cut taxes and sharply raise government spending. So again, this threatens the carry trade, and some are suggesting that this is what could have been behind the 900-point U.S. stock market plunge on January 20th. You know, it was initially said, well, this was threat over the Greenland tariffs and so on, but it was coincident with the same time as this raising of interest rates in Japan and the threats to that yen carry trade. So anyway, that's just one place to keep an eye on. And I think that this just brings us back to the point. What do we do in light of the financial collapse and the commitment to hegemony by the transatlantic financial establishment? It cannot work for them any longer. They have to give up the ghost. And what we are proposing, that is those aligned with the LaRouche movement and working with Helga Tsepp-LaRouche, she has put forward this declaration of January 12th. Let us create a movement of world citizens. And what this does is consolidate those that had participated in the EIR roundtable entitled "It's Worse Than You Think" on the Venezuela crisis. But there was a call to create a citizens movement around the world to get people aligned with the kind of approach that Helga has put forward, which is that we need a new international development and security architecture. That is the only way that we're going to resolve this crisis. So I encourage you to go to the schillerinstitute.com site, sign on to this declaration and circulate it, as well as supporting the campaign of Diane Sare. She has put her hat in the ring for the U.S. presidency and made it clear that she did so with the intent of providing the leadership now. This is not about 2028. This is about providing the leadership now. So that is what some of the things that we're involved in, and we encourage you to get involved and otherwise stay tuned to the LaRouche organization.